give us 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. Thank you.
Demonstration area for many of these clean solutions. Have you been working? How is this area? Nowadays, it's rolling in building almost had a slow start. Someone starts and follow. So both the big companies and residents are there. They have tried to have climate energy projects, especially the finances of energy company. Start
We good to go, Ian? Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us and for your patience. We just waited till a few people joined just now. My name is Oliver Johnson. I'm the head of the Climate, Energy and Society unit here at the Stockholm Environment Institute's headquarters. I thought I'd first start with a welcome and then introduce a little bit just about SEI for those of you who don't know SEI so well. And then I'll hand over to Mariko from Sitra, the Finnish Innovation Fund, to present some of the main insights from this wonderful report, Nordic Green to Scale, for cities and communities. And Mariko will speak a bit about the whole project, or just at least introduce. This is quite a long-running project, and this is a specific, most recent part of it, focusing on the city scale and community scale green solutions. And I've been very fortunate enough to be one of the steering group members for this project. So it's been a pleasure working with Mariko and her team, and also with the other organizations that were involved in the steering group for this project. So today we're here to celebrate the launch of this report just a week or so ago. And also we have a great panel where we'll be discussing some experiences from different perspectives about how to actually implement green solutions, sustainable solutions at the city scale, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities. So I'm really excited about that discussion. So very warm welcome to our panelists for that. So just before I hand over to Mariko to present, I thought I'd introduce SEI, the Stockholm Environment Institute, for those of you who don't know us so well. So SEI is an independent research institute. We were founded in 1989 and we have our headquarters here in Stockholm, but we are a very distributed organization with about 7 or 8 centers all over the world. So we have centers in the UK, in Estonia, in the US, and 3 regional centers, one in Colombia for Latin America, one in Kenya for Africa region, and one in Thailand for the Southeast Asia region. So we really have a very broad kind of representation within SEI, roughly, I'm going to say around 230 employees spread over those different centers. And we work on issues around environment and sustainable development, seeking to bridge science, policy and practice in those areas. So we have work on a range of different topics, from climate, air, health, water, governance issues. We've got the work on cities, green finance, adaptation. So really running now. You know, as we were chatting with Mariko earlier, the environment sort of permeates all sectors and parts of society. So kind of the work just really we're involved in a lot of work on a lot of issues around the world. So we are a very international organization in the work we do, but here at headquarters we do a lot of work within Sweden, within the Nordic region and within Europe. So it's exciting for me because I actually started my SEI career in our Africa Center in Nairobi. I was there for 4 years, and then I moved to the Asia Center in Bangkok for 1.5 years, and 1 year ago I came to the headquarters. And it's actually, even within this project, it's been very enjoyable and eye-opening to get to understand more about the Nordic context within the sort of climate energy space which I work in. So I've really appreciated that opportunity. So welcome to SEI. It's a pleasure to have you here, those of you in the room, and I think we have some participants online as well. So welcome to those online. Really glad you could join us. And this is something that I think a lot of organizations are thinking about. How can we improve our opportunities to get participants to join online, not least so that we can broaden the kind of engagement, but also think about the travel that we have and so on and so forth. So SEI is definitely thinking about that, and you know, we do make it a priority to ensure we can get remote participation from those who can't join us. So thank you very much for joining us online as well as in the room. So now I think I will hand over to Mariko to present the insights from the project, and then after that we will move on to the panel discussion. And just to say, after that we will be having a fika outside the room, so please do stay around for that. And if we don't manage to discuss all the questions we have at the panel discussion, we'll be able to continue chatting and networking after the discussion. Okay. So please, Mariko, over to you.
Thank you very much.
So my name is Mariko Lamström. Come from the Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra. I work there as a climate solution specialist. And I'm really happy to present to you today the results of this new analysis. So first I'll talk a little bit about what the green to scale approach is all about. Then we'll go over the Nordic results. Then we'll look at the Swedish results and some of the Stockholm perspective as well. And finally, we'll draw up some recommendations that can be made based on this analysis. So who are we? Green to Scale is a family of projects that's been coordinated by Sitra, but the partners in this project span all of the Nordic countries. One of these is the Stockholm Environment Institute. There's also University of Iceland, Cicero from Norway, and Concito from Denmark. And this time we also have the C40 cities supporting us. And these projects are funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers. And in addition to funding, they also provide guidance and substance. We're very thankful for that. And the Green to Scale is also part of the Nordic Prime Minister's initiative, Nordic Solutions to Global Challenges. And what we have been trying to do over the years is understand how far can we go with just the solutions that we already have. So we all know that innovations are very important, but we are running out of time. We know that as well. We cannot sit around for some miracle innovations to come. We have to start working with the tools that we already have. And this is the space that the Green to Scale project has been trying to map. What kind of solutions do we have that have been tried and tested in at least some countries and communities? And what kind of an effect would that have if we would scale up those solutions more widely? And when I say scaling up, what do I mean? So once we have identified some particularly inspiring, interesting climate solution and its implementation case, we ask, what if comparable communities or countries in the previous analysis would do the same, would reach the same level of implementation that the benchmark already has? So here we have an example of electric cars. So we all know that Oslo is a world leader in electric vehicles. Currently, about 12% of their fleet are battery electric vehicles. In the Swedish communities, could be considered comparable to the Norwegian ones. The average here is about 0.3% currently, so a bit behind. So then we ask, what kind of an emissions effect and what kind of a cost effect would that have if also the Swedish communities would reach the 12% electric vehicles of their car fleet? So in other words, we're asking what kind of effect would it have if we scale up to the solutions to the extent that somebody has already achieved. And I must stress that this does not in any way indicate the full potential of these solutions. For example, for electric vehicles, there's no reason for us to believe that 12% is the maximum potential that we could reach, but it is an inspiring case, and we hope and we believe that learning from those who have already succeeded in scaling up the solution to an extent will help also others do the same and inspire them to take climate action, stronger climate action straight away. This is the fourth project in the Green to Scale series. We had great results in the first three phases. So the first Green to Scale was a global version, was published just before the Paris conference in 2015. There we looked at the best climate solutions we could identify globally and also scaled those up globally to similar countries. And we found that just by scaling up these existing solutions to the level that the leaders had already achieved, we could cut a quarter of the global emissions that we currently have. Next year, we looked at Nordic solutions and scaled those solutions up in comparable countries, so basically OECD countries, and found that we could reduce emissions by the same amount as the EU currently produces, about 4 gigatons per year. And then the third phase went a little bit deeper into the implementation of these solutions in particular countries. So we looked at 5 countries in Europe and 2 countries in Africa and tried to see how we could implement these Nordic solutions there. And again, we found great potential for reducing emissions, so up to 40% on top of the current plans that these countries have. We could reduce emissions with these Nordic solutions. And today we talk about the Cities and Communities report. So this time we have looked at climate solutions in the Nordic cities and communities, and we also scaled those up within the peer cities and communities just within the Nordics. So why cities? Because cities can really be drivers of ambitious climate action. If we think about it, cities are in fact already the spearheads of climate action in many countries where the national governments are struggling to implement the measures and targets that are needed. But even if those countries would step up, or the national governments would step up their game, which we of course need them to do, the cities would still have a crucial role. There are many reasons for that. First is that cities have tools, communities have tools that the national governments don't. They also much better understand the local challenges and possibilities that they have, and they're much more operative actors. So cities can effectively enable the sustainable lifestyles of their citizens, and they are also able to, in a much more agile way, test and try out new solutions, find out which ones work, and then scale those up very quickly. This time we analyzed 14 solutions from the Nordics, from larger cities and smaller communities. Mostly they focus on the energy and transport sector because that is where the emissions mostly come from in the Nordic community. So going through them quickly, we have both onshore and offshore wind from Ringkøbing and Copenhagen in Denmark. Then we have 5 different district heating solutions from communities in Finland, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland. From buildings, we have the ground source heat pumps from here in Stockholm. And in the transport sector, we have use of public transport from the Helsinki area, electric vehicles from Oslo, cycling in urban areas from Copenhagen, and electric ferries from Norway. And then we have a couple of food and waste sector solutions, so biogas from food waste from Oslo and reduction of retail food waste from Vantaa, Finland. And this is, of course, by no means not all the solutions that we have out there. And as we speak, the Nordic communities are coming up with more. We wanted to highlight also some of the more emerging type of solutions that we ran into during the making of this report. And here I have listed some of them. So these are solutions that may not have been implemented very widely yet, but in 2, 5, 10 years of time, they could become very important. They're not the type of solutions that we could analyze yet in terms of this project because they have not been implemented very widely, and the scaling up to the level that somebody has already achieved would not bring us very far. But we are expecting to see development in these areas. Maybe in the next report, we can already raise up some of these. Then to the results. So we found that if the Nordic communities would scale up these 14 solutions that I said to the extent that the leaders already have, we could reduce emissions by 26 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalents. And this is about half the emissions that Sweden currently produces. So this is a significant contribution in tackling the climate crisis. And as you can see, a majority, about 2/3 of these solutions, of the reduction potential come from the energy sector, and then the last third from buildings and transport combined. Going a bit deeper into the solutions, we find that many of them have a large potential. Some have a bit smaller potential, but it doesn't mean that they're not worth implementing, because they might, and they do, bring significant environmental and social co-benefits. And like I said, this is not the full potential of these solutions. We can go further and reach higher emission reductions if we can implement them further than they currently have been in the Nordic communities. And what this emission reduction stands for is the direct emissions from these technologies and the technologies that they would currently replace, as well as the electricity, the average grid electricity that the solutions might use. So this is the emission reduction one might see in the emissions accounting of a municipality, a city, from this point of view. And just a quick note, some of these solutions do overlap, meaning that they address the same base of emissions. So especially the 2 wind power solutions reduce exactly the same emissions in the Nordic power grid. So we can only reach this 12.5 megatons emissions reduction once. We can either implement one of them or a mixture of the 2 solutions, but we cannot sum them up. And then also the district heating solutions in some networks they overlap a bit. But this has been taken into account in the total numbers that I have shown you and will show you regarding Sweden and Stockholm. We also tried to understand what are the costs and savings that come with these solutions from the point of view of the communities as a collective. So we have included all the taxes, the EU emission allowances, the national incentives that we have for these solutions, and tried to capture the point of view of the person who's using the technology, the person who's making the decision, so a person who might buy a vehicle or an energy company who might choose to implement an energy technology. And so on the I don't know how to point, but on the right side here, you see the average net unit abatement costs of scaling up these solutions in the Nordic countries. And what this means is how much does it cost to reduce 1 ton of emissions with the solution in the Nordics over the whole life cycle of the solution. And overall, we see that it is quite affordable, actually, for the communities, most of these solutions. And overall, we actually find that the solutions would bring net savings to the communities. So we see that some of the solutions come with a net cost over their lifetimes, but most come with net savings. And summing up all of them, we find that in total, the Nordic communities could save 460 million euros annually by taking these solutions into use with the current cost estimates. Going further, we might expect to see even larger savings numbers as the technologies develop, and we also might see even higher penalties for using fossil fuels. Then looking at the Swedish results, if Swedish communities would implement these solutions to the extent that leaders already have, emissions could be reduced by about 7 megatons. That's equal to about 13% of the current emissions in Sweden. Now we can see that over half of the potential comes from implementing more wind power. But I must say that wind power is a bit different from the other solutions that we see here, because if we build wind power somewhere, say in Stockholm, it doesn't necessarily reduce the emissions from Stockholm, because that would be connected to the Nordic power grid, and it could reduce emissions in some other Nordic community, in some other Nordic country even. But here we have allocated the emission reduction resulting from building that wind power to the place that builds the capacity. Because Sweden does not have much fossil fuel-based power production left, most of this emission reduction actually would come from Sweden and Denmark, where most of that is left. But here we have allocated the emission reduction for Sweden. The rest are pretty much direct emission reductions from the communities that would implement the solutions. So district heating solutions, all of them combined. So that was wastewater heat pumps, seawater heat pumps, solar thermal, and data center waste heat could reduce about a bit over 1 megaton of emissions. Geothermal, as it has been applied in Iceland, doesn't have potential here, but maybe new technologies make that more relevant here as well. Ground source heat pumps, 0.2 megatons. This is mainly removing all the rest of the oil and gas-based buildings heating that we have in Sweden. That is not very much, because we already implemented this quite far. And then in the transport sector, we have about 1.6 megatons of emission reduction potential in total, most of that coming from the electric vehicles. And overall, these solutions would save over 80 million euros annually in these communities. So going through again with wind power, here we have assumed about half of this wind power addition would be offshore, and that's why we see a positive cost here. If it would all be onshore, then the cost would be clearly negative, because that is much cheaper. The district heating solutions bring large savings, about 50 million euros annually in total. And in Sweden, the electricity that these large-scale heat pumps use is still quite expensive, because they pay the full electricity tax that the consumers also pay, and not the tax that the industry applications would pay. But here you also have such heavy taxation on the fossil fuels that it takes the it makes the heat pumps profitable already, even with the slightly more expensive electricity. The ground source heat pumps bring a significant saving. Here, oil and gas and direct electric heating is quite expensive compared to the other Nordic countries, so clear savings there. In the transport sector, overall the solutions bring maybe a small cost, pretty cost neutral. So in Sweden, the electric vehicles are the most expensive from all of the Nordic countries to the consumer or the user who's looking to buy one, because here you have relatively small incentives compared to Norway or Denmark or Iceland. And here people drive on average shorter distances. The cars get a shorter mileage during their lifetime than in comparison with Finland. So in Finland you would get larger savings from driving with electricity. So here it still costs money to the consumers on average to switch to an electric car. And so even though the emission reduction potential of reducing the food waste from retail sector here is quite small, it actually brings a significant saving. So it might be good to implement anyway. We also did the calculation for Stockholm and found that we could reduce 1.3 megatons of emissions, and that is actually equal to almost 2/3 of the current emissions in Stockholm. But again, we see that almost half of this is wind power, which again doesn't necessarily reduce emissions from right here in Stockholm. So currently the emissions that come from electricity usage in Stockholm are about 400 kilotons. So this amount of wind power would be enough to compensate all of that, and then 200 kilotons on top of that. The rest are directly from here. So the district heating solutions, almost 600 kilotons. This is actually close to 90% of the current district heating emissions in Stockholm. It would require a bit more analysis to determine what is the actual technical potential of these different solutions here. But at least in theory, we see great potential. Most of this has been assumed to come from data centers because it is quite uncertain how large of a potential solar heat or further seawater heat pumps would have here. And catching up to the leaders in terms of the electric vehicles and cycling would cut emissions about 120 kilotons. That's about 12% of the current transport emissions in Stockholm. And this would come at a saving of 30 million euros. Mostly, or the largest sources of savings are the district heating solutions and cycling. So we believe that all countries and communities have something valuable to teach others and something that they could learn from others. And during this analysis, we got a great chance to compare the different Nordic countries with each other. And we identified some things that Sweden does particularly well compared to other Nordic countries, and then some things that Sweden maybe does not do so well. So in Sweden, compared to the other Nordic countries, people cycle somewhat less. Even though there is heavy fossil fuel taxation, it does not extend to peat. So peat use is not taxed very much at all. And the electricity taxes for large-scale heat pumps are high, which eats into their profitability, and the incentives for electric cars are small. On the brighter side, the emissions per capita in Sweden are by far the lowest out of all of the Nordic countries, and the fossil fuel taxation is heavy. Public transport use is high in urban areas, and heat pumps in houses are very widespread. Also, the separate collection rate of biowaste is high in comparison with the other Nordic countries. And we usually cannot duplicate what others have done, but learning from the experiences of others usually helps in removing our own barriers to implementing the solutions as well. And even though the national taxation, national infrastructure, the national enablers are very important in deploying these solutions, the local action does make a huge difference. So here are some recommendations that we collected based on the successful cases that we studied in this analysis. So first, set a good, comprehensive, systematic framework that creates a shared understanding of the future development. And what does this mean? Means, for example, setting emission targets and budgets in line with the Paris Agreement level of ambition, introducing sector-specific strategies with concrete measures and roadmaps to reach those emissions reductions, and introducing mechanisms to monitor the progress. Means involving stakeholders and citizens in a dialogue and decision-making about climate action and collecting and publishing data. Second, harness the power of your local tools. For example, spatial planning. Smart spatial planning can effectively enable the use of low-carbon transport solutions as well as local renewable energy. Introduce financial incentives to reduce emissions. For example, this could mean congestion charges, parking fees, waste fees. Harness the power of public procurement and use the municipality as a testbed for new climate solutions. Require the municipality-owned companies to implement climate solutions and cooperate with other municipalities, authorities, and the private sector wherever you can in order to reach more optimized and effective, efficient results. And finally, ensure your future success. For example, develop the distribution grid for electricity in a forward-looking way to enable the electrification that we are expecting to see in the future. Recognize and build capabilities that are necessary for future decarbonization and raise awareness of climate solutions and activate local companies and citizens to take part and share your experiences with peers and learn from the experiences of others. To conclude, solutions exist, they are attractive, now we just need leadership. So national governments have a major role to play to enable the deployment of these solutions, like I said, taxation, infrastructure, for example. But local action does make a big difference because the local communities can effectively enable the sustainable lifestyles for their citizens, and they're key in testing and spreading the new solutions. And learning from those that have already taken the solutions into use really can smooth the road and take us much further and much faster. So you can find all the materials related to the Green to Scale project at greentoscale.net. We'll have a few events at the COP in Madrid in next month, and there'll be one more released event in Norway, probably in January 2020. And if any of this interests you, please reach out. We are always open for cooperation. Thank you very much. Do you have time for questions or later?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mariko. That was brilliant. I think what we'll do now is we'll open up for a few questions, so that based on the presentation and the work, and then maybe we've got sort of 10, 15 minutes for that, and then we'll move into the panel discussion. So I'll spot people, but for you, has anyone got any questions, any thoughts, any reflections? Okay, thank you at the back.
Hi, thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think it's okay. You won't be able to hear it here. This is for the online. Oh. But also, could you say your name and where you're coming from as well, so that we know who you are? That's always good.
Yeah, perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Madison, and I recently graduated with my master's in environmental management and policy. But my question was about, you mentioned that the Swedish government isn't taxing peat.
Yep.
And so I was wondering what the reasoning was behind that, and are you engaging in discussions with the Swedish government about potentially taxing it in the future?
Let's see if there's any more. We might take a couple of questions. But if there's just that one to start us off. Okay, maybe if you can.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Josephine. I'm from the city of Malmö, and I wonder if you, during this study, have some insight on why are we not upscaling this immediately? What's stopping us, both on national and local level?
Yeah.
And thank you for a very nice presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, about peat. So it is my understanding that currently peat is kind of classified as a biofuel here. So it doesn't have the same taxation that the fossil fuels get. The situation is relatively similar in Finland. There is a small tax, but compared to the fossil fuels who produce similar amounts of emissions, or peat actually tends to produce more per amount of energy, it is heavily subsidized because the taxes are lower. The reasons why that is of course it's the local fuel here. There are a lot of jobs attached to the production of peat, and yeah, it's kind of a sore spot here, similar to what the brown coal could be in Germany. So it's the local fuel that you want to kind of support, and lots of people would say that you want to first get rid of the imported fossil fuels before you want to touch that. But of course we know that it does produce at least the same amount of emissions as burning coal, and even just digging it out from the ground really produces a lot of emissions and causes stress for the biodiversity locally, and there are effects for the local water systems and things like this. We as Sitra are not lobbying or engaging in discussion with the Swedish government directly. We are more trying to push this in the Finland side, and this is something that is recognized in Finland at least, but it is a difficult discussion to have because there are actual jobs attached to that, and it's very concentrated in certain areas where this activity takes place. So even though the effects for the whole national economy would not be very large locally, they might be severe, and the government is now trying to come up with a plan. And we are also looking forward to digging into a bit deeper of what actually are, what is the size of those effects locally, and what can we possibly do, what kind of fuels we can use to replace that, what kind of other uses for peat there are, and how we could do this transition in a fair way so that nobody would have to suffer too much. The barriers, in general, I think this was a good introduction to that. We did try to identify the barriers that are most general for each of these solutions, and found many, of course. Very common ones are that even though these would, over their lifetime, these solutions would bring savings, they require a big investment to start with. So the access to finance might be limited, or the knowledge on how to access that finance might be limited. And just a general lack of knowledge of the solutions and what the current price level is and all the co-benefits that these solutions would bring, which are often great. The information or knowledge is just not out there. And then, of course, there are leadership issues in many communities. So generally, one would require a strong commitment from the leaders and the decision makers in the municipality or in the city in order to be able to actually execute the solutions. And yeah, we identified a list of those. I'm sure you will find that in the report of all the barriers.
Yeah, and I think that's in the report. But what was also interesting during the process of the project, just kind of listing different solutions. I mean, I think what you saw here is the snapshot of the solutions that have seemed to have, there's a real benchmark case where it's been really fairly widely implemented in a particular locality, and also where there was data to gather that.
Yeah.
Because the long list starting was really fascinating to see all the different types of solutions that were out there, whether they'd been really implemented or were starting to be looked at. I think that in its own right was a really useful process, and because a lot of the time people aren't always aware of what different solutions in different sort of subsectors there are. So that was a really nice
that's
part.
a really important point about the data. So even if some communities would have implemented solutions, they often have maybe not gathered too much data on what has actually happened, how much did it cost, what did it take, And if they had, they definitely haven't published it, so it's really difficult to find that information, which makes it, of course, very much harder for the others to follow along when that information isn't publicly available, and you always have to call someone like, hey, I heard you did this, like, how did it work? So we definitely would need some more systematic ways of spreading the best practices.
We had one here, one question there, just behind you, Aina, just here, and then we'll take the next one at the back.
Hi, I'm Åsa Minos. I'm coming from Viable Cities, which is a Swedish strategic innovation program on smart and sustainable cities. Very, very great presentation. Thank you so much. Inspires a lot of questions. We have an initiative running which aims at having 9 cities spearheading the efforts to accelerate climate transition to 2030, among which Malmö. And one thing that we discuss a lot is about, it's not all about technology, it's not all about mainstreaming existing solutions, but it's also to make the acceleration work faster. We need to change regulations. Yep. We need to change governance systems and such. So how can you kind of reflect upon these things? It's like yes. If we transit to electrical vehicles, we will still kind of have a regulation that is geared towards privately owned cars and so on and so forth. Could you kind of just give a reflection on that?
Yes.
Thank you.
We'll get one more. If you're happy to collect one more, just so I think that's.
Hi, my name is Alan. I'm from Hong Kong. I'm an entrepreneur connecting the Hong Kong businesses and the Nordic businesses. And my question is regarding in 2015 and 2016, Finland has launched a Finnish roadmap to the circular economy. Is this Green to Scale project some part of the strategy of the whole roadmap, or it is a separate line or separate stream of that? Thank you very much.
Sure. Okay, we'll start with you. Sounds amazing. Thank you for sharing about that cooperation that you have. This separation between like technologies or changes in behavior that reduce emissions and the enablers, the policy frameworks and regulation that can make that happen was also a struggle for us during this process, because of course we need both. But in terms of this analysis here, it was just much more straightforward to focus on technologies that you can actually attach a clear emission reduction tag to it. For a policy framework that enables those kinds of new solutions are absolutely essential, but trying to assess what's the actual emission reduction of some certain change, and does that actually translate in a similar way to other communities, is very, very difficult, but of course something that we all must do, and that is maybe the next step that we have to take. When we listed these solutions, we tried to list the enablers that were behind those solutions in each of the cases, but that is of course too general, and whenever somebody is actually, or like this is the next step that everybody must take who are interested in implementing these solutions, to like really find out like what enabled that solution and what kind of frameworks can we create to invite more of these solutions. And you're correct that especially about the electric vehicles, that you might actually end up somehow like supporting the private car use, even though we know that it would be better if as much as possible people would transition to using more of the public transport and cycling and walking and using the more sustainable modes of transport. It is difficult. We tried to select here only solutions that we see that are part of the solution package in the long run. But especially in terms of these mobility solutions, I believe that they, for different areas, different solutions are more relevant. For example, we only limited the analysis of cycling and the public transport to the urban areas because it is difficult to assess in different kinds of rural areas, like how relevant is this and how much would it cost to organize this kind of service or reach this kind of level of user rates, and if it would be transferable at all. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that we really need the local communities involved in this analysis that can analyze the local possibilities and the local challenges and find an optimal solution that starts from where you are and where you sort of need to be in the end in a carbon negative, climate positive society, and then imagine the pathway to there. Yeah, about the roadmap, yes, Finland does have the circular economy roadmap that was created by Sitra, by my organization, and there's already an updated version of that was made last year. The Green to Scale is, as a project, not part of that roadmap. It is a separate thing, but I think the same logic is also partly behind the circular economy roadmap of identifying best practices and best solutions that have been implemented and then scaling them up, of course. But yeah, not directly involved.
Great. Thank you very much, Mariko. I'm going to a round of applause, I think, for the presentation and well-answered questions, I think. And thanks very much for the questions. What I'm going to do now, maybe my colleague will help me move these tables into the middle, and we will ask the panelists to come up. So please come and join us. And I don't know, should we turn off the screen? Would that be? Yeah, because otherwise it will shine in people's eyes. And I will stand over here. So I think if you could go to that side, because you're sharing the microphone there, the two of you, and then we don't have enough of these, so. Oh, okay, great. I think it's this one here, isn't it? There we go. Perfect. Thank you. So, welcome to our panelists. What I'm going to do, my first question is to ask them to introduce themselves. We have first here we have Sara from the Lahti municipality, which you may or may not know was awarded European Green Capital 2021. So it's very exciting to have you here and tell us a bit about that process and now what it means for Lahti. We have Josephine, who's from the Malmö municipality, where they've developed a local roadmap for climate neutral buildings by 2030. We have Anna from Vasakronan, which is a leading property company in Sweden with a commitment to sustainability and carbon neutrality. And my colleague Karen from SEI, who works on, amongst other things, sustainable consumption in Swedish municipalities. So we have a really quite a nice diversity of panelists. We have not only Sweden represented, but also Finland, which we felt was really a great opportunity to build that kind of lessons learned from beyond the Swedish borders. But also we have the public sector, the private sector, and kind of research. So I think that's really nice to have and get slightly different perspectives and obviously different types of work that you're doing. So the first question, and we'll just maybe go along the line really, is could you introduce yourself and your organization and tell us just a little bit about the work you've been doing on achieving sustainability within the urban environment and green solutions. So maybe Sara, you're welcome.
All right.
And welcome to Sweden.
No, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me and thanks for the great presentation. It's a great pleasure being here. My name is Saara Vauramo. I work as the program director now for the European Green Capital 21 Lahti project. I used to work also as an environmental director for 4 years, and then I also have a little bit of political background myself, being one period in a city council member. So I sort of realized the importance of political commitments behind as well. My background is in environmental science, so I did my PhD 2011 about urban ecology and ecosystems in urban contexts, which at the time wasn't that well researched topic. Well, currently I work also a lot with energy sector, about urban mobility and so on. So climate issues are very much raising now, and we are in the middle of really interesting process now, building a lot of partnerships for the Green Capital, also looking a lot to Swedish cities and municipalities. So it's great pleasure being here, also learning from your side a lot. So I'm looking for this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Josephine.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. It's very nice to be here. I'm Josephine Nellerup. I'm the strategist of urban development of the city of Malmö, and I'm here because of the local roadmap for climate neutral buildings. It started with a thought from our political leaders around shouldn't Malmö have strategy for wood building, and then I used my network through the Swedish municipalities and for my network with the developers and stakeholders, and I thought, no, this is not the way to go. The 3.0 wooden building strategies of Sweden will be something else, and we are very far behind, so I need to speed up, and therefore we should be focusing on the kilos of carbon emissions, and due to that I took the Swedish law in that Sweden will be carbon net at 2035, and compared it to Agenda 2030 that the city of Malmö is the first European city to sign, and compared it also with the national roadmap for infrastructure and building to connect to the law, and said to my network, isn't it possible to do this like an operation down to 2030? And I got a lot of both international and national and local constructors, builders and stakeholders that said, of course, we want to do this. So we merged the national context down to the geographic of Malmö with a goal to be net carbon goal on 2030. And Vasakronan is one of our great supporters and participations in this work. And today we are 102 organizations from stakeholders, developers, constructors, material producers, and consulting through the whole chain of building construction and infrastructure that has signed the network and the cooperation due to building in this geography with this goal, and it's amazing. So thank you. Yeah.
Great. I think you both deserve a round of applause for the great work that's being done there. Definitely, kind of, we've got Lahti and Malmö, so I'm very impressed. And Anna, Vasakronan's working all over Sweden, at least, and not least in Malmö.
Yes, we are. In Malmö, here in Stockholm, Uppsala and Gothenburg. Yeah. So we focus on the 4 major cities of Sweden. And we are a property company, actually the largest real estate company here in the Nordics. And we do office buildings and retail buildings mostly. And we're also proud to have reduced our carbon emissions, our direct carbon emissions, by 99% since 2006. And that is mostly because we have reduced our energy consumption by 56% since 2009. And we've also shifted out all fossil fuel combustion in our own buildings. We've changed our fleet, we've changed our traveling habits, and so forth. But being a real estate company heavily involved in also new development and large renovation projects, we also need that there are certain indirect emissions related to our business. And therefore, also because of working together with the city of Malmö, we recently decided that we want to become climate neutral in the whole value chain, including emissions related to construction works and also some of the emissions related to our tenants' use of the buildings, such as their own electricity consumption, if they have an own contract with the utility, their waste production, and also their travel or their commuting to and from our buildings.
Are we in one of your buildings?
Yes, you are.
Very interesting. No, that's really a commendable target to have set. So well done. Thank you. And last but not least, Karen.
Thank you. So yes, I work here at SEI as a research fellow, and I have a background in environmental science as well. And I worked quite a lot with climate change adaptation processes and adaptation to climate risks in Sweden, but nowadays also on sustainable consumption. So in sustainable consumption, not only addressing the direct emissions from consumption, but also the indirect impact from consumption of the goods and services from a life cycle perspective, both in Sweden and internationally, of course. And one of the projects I'm currently working on is on the role and potential of local governments to work with sustainable consumption and promote sustainable consumption within their administration, but also towards residents and other local actors within the municipalities. So we're looking at the barriers, opportunities, and what are the sort of challenges, opportunities. What is sustainable consumption for a municipality in Sweden? What are the different activities? So not only the technical solutions, but the different kinds of activities they are doing. And what consumption areas are in focus are also questions we are addressing. And some of that work is also related to indicators and the role of indicators to support and monitor and follow up the work they're doing. Yes, I'll leave it with that.
Thank you. My next question was linked to the Nordic Green to Scale report, and that was which is looking up scaling up existing solutions and the major impact that just simply scaling up can have existing solutions. So we're not always looking for brand new things, although that's an important endeavor, but there are existing solutions out there. So I was wondering, in each of the work that you do, how easy is it to scale up? Is the concept of scaling up, even just within the city, something, or maybe more broadly, if you're working more broadly than just in one city, Anna, is that a concept that's often thought about, scaling up, or is it, or does it not get the attention it deserves? And what are the challenges and barriers to scaling up? Because it's clear that there's huge potential, and we're here. We need to get there, and it's not being done. So great to get your thoughts on that.
May I?
Please, yes.
Can I actually say a little bit about our city first, for you to understand it a bit?
Yeah.
Well, we are the 8th largest city in Finland. We used to have a really big industrial background. Also, actually, nowadays we are still quite industrialized city. We have one of the biggest shares of private jobs within all the jobs that we have. And also, we were one of the cities that suffered the most during the Finnish economic recession during 1990s. So we had really kind of a hard background in our city. And also, I think that we started the environmental work in early 90s much because of the need to find something new for the future. And we started with water management issues, but also waste sorting facilities and so on. So people actually learn by living in our city to learn a bit more sustainably. And all the time, actually, international cooperation have been one part of the work. So we have been in discussion with Southern African cities, with China, with Russia, with European cities about different models of doing like waste management, for instance. But nowadays we discuss about climate change much, much more than we used to. And it's a bit different challenge as well to tackle. But we need to have like good local solutions, but all the time also finding good partners and innovations. To be honest, for scaling up, that's definitely not an easy task to do, to really direct and manage it through the municipal organization with also political leadership inbuilt into the processes. And you need to have also enough understanding about international solutions in order to do it exactly. And sometimes technologies enter up more easily than actually the ways how we are doing things, because then we have a local communities who are involved. So to be honest, I would say that's definitely not an easy task to lead cities and municipalities through these massive changes that we have to do.
So just following on, how do other Finnish cities now look at Lahti, and how does that inspire them, perhaps? Is that?
Yeah, well, I think we are now quickly changing our image as a city because of the becoming green capital. So many of the cities in Finland, what they know from us is the history, but they don't know how advanced we actually already are. But at the same time, we also work a lot with other municipalities in Finland in a very practical manner. And one of the cases in the report was also the climate neutral leadership model of cities in Finland. And there's already more than 70 cities involved, working a lot together, also finding good solutions. So it's more about cooperation than competition, I would say, nowadays.
Okay. Yes, Josephine, if you want to reflect on, could we scale this up across other, and how would we do that? And is there any momentum to do that? I think this is fascinating to see. I'm very interested also in the downscaling of the national kind of plans, which I think is very is nice because it aligns as well. But many of your participants will be working in other, like Vasakronan, but others will be working in other cities. So how do you think this could be scaled up, or is there any?
I think there is two perspectives on this, and I think there is three words that are important. The first one is knowledge or awareness about the climate crisis and also about the solutions. And the other one is courage, to do something in another way that you used to do. And the third is money. I really want climate to be a good business. Climate needs to be something that is a better business affair, a better money opportunity than the other way. And these three words is the key for our participation within this. One of the perspectives is really egoistic for Malmö, the geographic, to get down the kilos within our geographic, because one thing that we have learned that we really didn't know before is that the construction within the value chain, the indirect kilos, are such a great amount of our emissions. It's more than the whole of our traffic emissions. If one of our stakeholders, they have calculated that the energy in 1 square meter in their building is 2 kilos of emissions. And the same square meters due to construction is 200 kilos. So we are needed to focusing on the right kilos. And therefore, this is so important. Due to that, I believe that, yes, we can upscale it, but if I am going to have the courage in 102 different organizations with different business opportunities, I can't scare them to say, okay, if you do take this step, you need to do it in whole of Sweden at once, like Vasakronan is doing. Some of them have to try and learn in a small scale in our geographic to steady learning from that one to be capable to maintain the 2035 law. I think perhaps the thing, the way of working is absolutely upscalable, but you have to be very you have to listen about what kind of opportunities each business and organization have to do that. We have different starting points.
So you may be able to upscale the process rather than the exact, what happens.
Yeah. So our 100, they are all the goal to halven their emissions due to 5 years. And all the developers have promised one climate neutral project within Malmö at that time.
Okay.
So we're also upscaling within this geographic.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you.
And I need to also say that one of the participations that we have to do is the financial bankers. They have to start a whole different kind of business process. That's the key.
Yeah, thank you.
Which I at least see the beginning of, I think. We believe at Vasakronan, yes. So thanks to our ambitious green financing plans.
Okay.
Yes. And maybe I can comment.
Yeah, please come in, and because I was going to ask, these three words Josephine mentioned, knowledge, but courage and money particularly. I think from private sector, you need courage from authorities to sort of provide that kind of public or kind of guidance or policy guidance or kind of commitments as well. I assume that helps to provide an environment where you can, that bolsters the work you want to do. And also it sounds like the finance as well. So it'd be great to hear your perspective.
Yes, but to be honest, I don't think it's the politicians on the national level that gives us courage.
Yeah. Okay.
Not at all. It's our local fellows in the cities. Because the sector where we're doing business is not typically very highly regulated, or it's not regulated at all from an environmental perspective, I would say. But on the local level, we are dependent on good relationship with the municipalities for the planning processes and the planning permission and building permissions to be able to develop our portfolio. And therefore, it's much more encouraging for us to engage locally. And I think that's also a way of scaling up things, because different municipalities tend to focus on different things, or they engage with the local business society in different ways. So thanks to the work in Malmö, we have now decided to become climate neutral in the whole business, because it doesn't make sense to become climate neutral in one city and say, but it's okay for us to become climate neutral until 2045 in the other cities. No, At least it would not make sense for us. And I think Uppsala, the city of Uppsala, is another great example. They have something called Uppsala Klimatprotokoll, and they give out challenges for the companies that participate. And I think it was nearly 5 years ago, they had a new challenge, which was solar PV. So they tried to engage the companies or engage them by first build knowledge, and then who will be the companies with most PVs in Uppsala within 5 years. And of course, that was challenging for us, and we do have the money, so we started to invest in Uppsala. And now we have PVs on almost all the roofs in Uppsala. But that also led to the other cities of the Vasakronan portfolio to that they wanted to also invest in PVs.
So it's kind of like an upscaling within.
Yes.
In a way,
Yeah,
which,
so.
but
Yes.
also that needs to happen with knowledge, development knowledge. It doesn't all come at once, and even upscaling solutions. It's not simply technology transfer. We know is not simply uprooting, putting it there, and that's all great. You need to develop the capabilities to understand, to manage, to adapt it into the local situation. So that's really interesting to hear how you've done that. I will ask Karen, from a researcher perspective, kind of where are the main knowledge gaps then that you're trying to fill within the research you do on sustainable consumption within cities?
Yeah. I can just add first that in our discussions with local stakeholders, they sort of mentioned that the building and construction sector is a very difficult area to address. So I think there's a lot of potential to learn from your work. And I think there's a lot of interest among other municipalities as well. And in our research, one of the knowledge gaps that we see is sort of to understand both the climate impacts from consumption and how to effectively monitor and follow up on the consumption, which also is something that we see that is needed from actors working with these issues. So to be able to see, are your activities or your instruments having an effect or not? So how to do that and how to follow up on your work and also prioritize and identify actions. Other aspects that we look at is sort of what are the sort of identify more gaps in terms of policy instruments. What are the effective policy instruments and how to find synergies and opportunities between different areas. And yeah, those are some of the aspects. And also in terms of collaboration and networking, which also is an important area. And I think there's a lot of interest and like an important tool to share good examples and share learning as we discuss here today, but also to take it from there. So that's one thing. And what's the next thing to then go to implementation?
And are there specific sort of sectors when it comes to the consumption or specific things that you've been working on, or?
Yeah, we have in this particular project that I'm talking about now, we're trying to get an overview of the sustainable consumption as such. So we do not look into a specific consumption area, but I know there are other projects that are looking more into sustainable food or transport, etc. But in this project, we're trying to have this whole perspective to see, okay, what are the gaps and opportunities, and to sort of find what can we learn from certain areas and where do we need to put more effort, like in the building and construction sector.
And how engaged are the municipalities? What's your kind of response when you've taken this? Because I know you're partnering with some. Is it, is there real interest?
Yes,
is it
it's a huge interest, I would say. And there are many good examples in Sweden of municipalities that are doing quite a lot. And it's not always framed as sustainable consumption, but I think if we look at different examples, there are lots of work going on. And the particular municipalities that we're working on, they are very engaged and want to drive this work forward. And we also did a national survey that we're about to launch within the coming weeks to all Swedish municipalities. And from that side, we can see that there are a lot of municipalities that are sort of doing a lot of things related to sustainable consumption in Sweden. So I think we have clearly something to build upon there.
Great. And just one thing I wanted to reflect on, we have some colleagues looking at green bonds in city level, and it's something we did discuss, I remember, in the early stages, but it wasn't there was no example where this solution is fully fledged and up and running. So it's kind of an emerging area, right? So it's kind of mentioned, we discussed it, but an area to watch to see how these actually take off. I think they are taking off here, but you still have to, see how they run over the course of a few years to see what the impact that's having. I'd like to open up the floor to questions, not just within the room, but also if there's any questions from participants online. I think, Ian, you'll be monitoring that, right? Great, thank you. So we had one here to start. Do we have a microphone that I can take around? Maybe I'll borrow yours. And let us know who you're directing it at, if there's anyone in particular.
Well, my name is Mats Eking. I have a background in the Nordic cooperation on environment. I don't think the big problem is knowledge gaps. I think the problem is the gap between researchers, the community as a whole, and political the decision making from politicians, and we always end up there in a way. So this is my question: how to bridge that gap rather than others.
Okay, thank you. And would it be fair to direct that at the municipalities? Anyone who would like to
start?
Sure.
May I start?
Yeah, while others are thinking of their question. Or you have your...
It's a great transition process that all the cities and municipalities, basically the whole world, is going through. And we have to understand that it actually will take considerably much more time than we wish. And for instance, in our city, we started 30 years ago with environmental issues, and currently we can visibly see some of the benefits of that. And political decision making is always very short period planning. It's like 4 years planning with the city council, and that's their commitment to do. And it's really, really challenging trying to convince the political leaders to make decisions strong enough, maybe implementing really big investment projects, just because there would be visible benefits after 20 years. So we need to have like short-term benefits as well. We need to do things that are very, very visible. And that's why I also very much like some of the sustainable urban mobility projects, because they change completely the atmosphere of cities. So you need to have like this very big transitional processes with energy sector, with circular economy, but they are much often behind the scenes. And then you need to have this very visible physical projects in the urban environment, together with private sector, together with citizens, and then finding inspiration to the process, because that's the key. We can't force this really. We need to have a lot of inspiration and goodwill to do it.
Any other reflections, please?
Can I continue?
Yes, please.
Because I think if we have a lot of meetings and a lot of debates and a lot of studies in our type of work, and I'm so tired of it. I don't want to do that anymore. I want something to happen in real life. So therefore, I think that the skills and the knowledge and the products that are in the building construction side need to be on the construction's knowledge and the design level that the stakeholders has, that makes the business cost less, gives our people within the city affordable houses within climate neutral buildings. And there the municipality have a quite small role. We don't build. When the 80% of what is building in our city is not the city or even the city municipalities company who do it. Some of the things we do is kindergarten schools and infrastructure.
And in that business types, the co-creation is very important to say that we are wanting the same price but a better product. I want the same price for the kindergarten because I want to keep my teachers in school. So at the same price, I want a better product that is climate neutral. Give me that. And it's fully possible. And we know it because we have cities in Sweden who do that today. We can, with the same amount of money, with the right written proposals, have infrastructure that costs the same, but with the right concrete is 35-40% better for the climate. But the heavy kilos is in the maintaining the buildings within the city that good stakeholders are maintaining and rebuilding, and that kind of network between the cooperation in the value chain, the knowledge and the business that gets better if you do it climate neutral. That's the way. And the banks today, they give your business a better opportunity if you focus on the few kilos in the energy and forget about the construction site. And that's a problem.
Please, yes.
My name is Elinor Avsan. I'm the chair of the Swedish Eco Municipalities, and we have 110 municipalities and regions members. And one of our main core issue is to scale up what other municipalities do. But we think it's very difficult to make to have municipalities to tell others what they actually are doing. I don't think if it's that they don't think that's so much to speak about, or they don't want to brag, or if it's a Swedish thing that they don't want to.
Famous jantelagen.
Yeah. So is that your picture? Is it easy to have municipalities to tell about what they are doing to others?
I think if it's okay if I answer,
Please, yeah.
I think you have that perspective also. We have a say that the north of Sweden starts in Lund, but if you have a broader perspective, I think we have a really lot to learn from each other. Even inside each municipality, but also from the 290. And you are a super important organization to have that network. And through you, I learn a lot from my colleagues through all of Sweden. So you take that home to your colleagues. Thank you. And also, when we have this kind of issues in teams or issues, then we have good network on individual perspective from other municipalities, and it's very important. Also to say that it's you can do it. So for me, for example, if we are talking for our municipality, are we going to have the courage to make climate neutral kindergartens? I can't have that. I don't have that kind of power to tell them, yes, you can. But I can say you can try to talk to these 3 municipalities that I know do it today. And they can tell you that the price is 20% less. So if you are eager to have cheaper projects, maybe you should do them climate neutral.
And I guess Vasakronan is learning within its business but in different municipalities. Are you taking what you're doing in one place and telling that to the next municipality? Is that how it kind of comes across?
Yes, that's exactly what we're doing. And sometimes it's inspired by the municipality, but sometimes it's maybe something that comes from a tenant or one of our suppliers or something. But we really try to engage all our regions together and learn from each other. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I also, when we have the science in this one, we have a really fantastic cooperation between science and different organizations through the value chain, working together to solve issues that you can't come up by yourself. So we get the best of everybody, and especially the science.
Yeah, carry on, and then we'll come to you, Sarah.
I think we really need to talk about finance, because one of the keys to scaling up is the possibilities of getting the money on the table. And I think it goes for any type of organization, whether it's on a national level, municipality level, or company level. Right now we are seeing a lot happening in the finance sector in terms of financing green projects. We need to educate them a little more. I definitely agree on that, Josephine. But we see a lot of investors now wanting to turn their back on fossil fuel investments, but they still need some kind of return on their investments. So they are actively seeking for investments in something that is greener, or at least not non-green. And therefore, there is actually a lot of money, a lot of green money out there. We see times in the market where it would not have been possible to come out to the market with a vanilla bond, i.e. non-green bond. But when we then issue a green bond, the investors are there, even if it's a sour week or something has happened. Both in the bond market and the commercial paper market, we see it clearly. And the banks, they are very keen on advertising their green bank loans to homes or residential units, where you get a rebate or where the interest rate is somewhere between 5 to 10 basis points lower than what you would have had otherwise.
So then what's the kind of...
And that's not because banks really want to save the planet. I think it's because they, in their in turn, can issue green bonds, so they can kind of attract this green wall of money that definitely is out there.
Okay. Are you going to talk about the finance?
Yeah, also that.
Let's go, Sarah, and then to Karen.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. There's so much possibilities now with the green finance. Also, I think more and more Nordic cities will launch their own green bonds in the near future. I've been involved with the Finnish municipality green bond scheme. They were the first in Finland launching that 3 years ago. And it's so much overrated in the first launch even, that we see that there are so much investors now going on for the green finance. And the cities, big cities especially, they are capable of developing their own green bond schemes, and that will happen for sure within a couple of years. But still about the networks, and thanks for this question. It's great that you have such big city municipality networks in Sweden. That's really, really great work. And I think one of the key roles of that networks could be actually hand-picking some of the best examples from the cities and municipalities, because for sure municipalities lack the resources of just networking. They might be actually extremely busy, which we often don't understand, that they are busy with their own works, and they are doing much, much more than we realize, and then we can't learn from their examples because of lack of resources, and I would expect from the networks to be sort of the key components of developing the knowledge together.
Karen.
Yeah. Just a small comment when we're talking about the finance, and you saw in this survey that economic incentives was one of the most important drivers for municipalities that have engaged in sustainable consumption. So it's important aspect.
What economic incentives to the municipality?
Yeah, so we asked what have been the most important factor that have sort of helped you initiating or driven your work, and then we have a list of different factors, and economic incentives was one of them, and that was the one that was highest ranked. We also had like national guidelines and policy instruments and so on, so that came further down, but for sure economic incentives is an important factor, that you do an investment implement something, and you should see that it also is economically feasible.
Yeah. Please, Josephine.
I think that also not only the good examples is a good way to go. SKL has also made, what do you call it in English? Frame political co-government for building, and are also going to do it for kindergartens. And if we can do that for net zero design process, then it is a much lower step for more municipalities or community companies to make it normal to do that kind of way. So that's a really good example.
Great. Any more questions? Any more comments or questions?
Could I just comment, like without question?
You're welcome.
In mind?
Yeah, well.
Just about the fact that actually also cities are capable of creating incredible innovations as well, together with different partners. And I would like to shortly present the world's first personal carbon trading. You can't see anything basically, but it's an application. It tracks the mobility modes, so it recognizes automatically how do I move within the city, and then you can actually calculate the emissions from that. And then we have a shared budget every week for all the users of that, and then we want to together decrease the CO2 emissions from the mobility, and we actually demonstrate and test it in world first personal carbon trading scheme now in Lahti currently, and this is kind of one of the pilots and solutions for the carbon neutral cities that we wish to share with you after we have removed all the bugs and mistakes and learn from that. So basically, I think these kind of tools will emerge, and I'm sure that you also have some of these really, really practical schemes that we can try to implement, and cities are doing way more innovative work already than we somehow realized to understand.
Yeah, and I think that's we with the report we were only able to sort of comment on the ones where there was the data, but you get that feeling that there's so much else going on underground, and it's only through kind of the networking and sharing that you can kind of start to hear about it, and that's a sort of ongoing, continuous endeavor. And then things emerge, and sometimes they can emerge very fast. You don't realize comes on in 1 year, but you don't realize there's 10 years of lag time of work on it to develop it to where it got to. If there are no more questions or comments, I think I'm going to end it here. And so what I'll do first is just ask for a final kind of comment from each of you. Maybe the main message you'd like the audience today to take away from the discussion or from the work you've been doing. And then we'll move to a fika, and we can continue discussions there and relax and network. So.
Well, just inspiration, courage, and be proud of someone else's good work. I find it really important.
Thank you.
I think the necessary is to try and learn and do it, and have the courage just to try and learn. And if you are wanting to learn more about the local roadmap, they have a website, and if you are wanting to come along and join us, You can do like Vasakronan and make an impact in our geographic and sign on.
Thank you. Anna.
And try to calculate the profitability of the things you can do to reduce your emissions. And if you don't find it profitable, calculate again.
That's good.
I will just talk to you now about this report because I think that's a really good example that makes it more like encouraging and visible for people that if you do an investment or do something, then it actually makes a difference. So I think that report is really good and illustrating and showing that, which could be used, to communicate and like use for inspiration or for actual implementation.
Sorry. Well, of course, we would love to partner with all of you. So if you're more, if you're willing or you have some ideas for us or partnerships or whatever, you find our information from greenlahti.fi, and my name is Saara Vauramo, and please send me emails and whatever, and I love to discuss with you later on then.
Great. Well, I think a big round of applause to the panelists, Sarah, Josephine, Anna and Karen. Thanks so much. And I'd like to thank a few other people. We've got Andrew, who's our events coordinator.
Let's take a photo. We need to have this all.
We've got Aina, I don't know if she's still in the room, and we've got Ian, who've been working behind the scenes. So thanks to all of those, my SEI colleagues working on this. And thanks to all of you who've joined online and also here in person. It's great to have you here to engage in the discussions. And thanks to Mariko for the presentation. We're just going to move outside and then relax. So thanks everyone.
Okay, can you take a photo?
Yeah, sure, pleasure.
Come over there with.
Yeah. You can.
Sorry.
Yeah.